After a long absence, Omnitanks have smashed their way back into the meta and are evolving and becoming more powerful with every banner released. So let's discuss how Omnitanks fell out of the meta, how they made their triumphant return, and lastly let's discuss the evolution of Omnitanks with an analysis on our newest Omnitank, Diamant. So originally the way Omnitanks worked was quite simple. You had a hero like base Merida who had a damage reduction B skill like Close Call 3 that reduced damage taken by 40%. So for example, let's say Merida had 30 damage incoming, she would reduce damage to 18, and then she would retaliate and use a healing special like Noontime to heal up a majority of the damage she had taken. But then one banner showed up and completely destroyed the Omnitank meta overnight, the Valentine's banner of 2021. Dual Lift showed up and completely destroyed the two main effects Omnitanks relied on, damage reduction and healing. Dual Lift had damage reduction, which meant Omnitanks were taking more damage than they ever were before, but he also introduced Fatal Smoke, which is a completely BS skill that works differently than any other smoke skill and actually stops healing during combat as well. This essentially meant Omnitanks were more fragile than ever and had no way to heal up damage, which meant they typically died in 1 or 2 combats instead of being able to face off against the entire enemy team. And the cherry on top was that this banner also introduced a new powerful tank type via save skills that could act as a replacement. So if that's the case, how have Omnitanks returned to the meta? After all, Fatal Smoke still exists, and there are more ways to reduce damage reduction than ever. Well, the 3 key effects that make Omnitanks work have all been majorly bugged. Let's start off by talking about damage reduction. So originally Omnitanks only had 1 layer of damage reduction to rely on, but last year we began to get a ton of new skills that allowed us to stack damage reduction. Some examples of this is Vile Astra granting damage reduction in the special slot, Speed Smoke 4 offering it in the C slot, and then there was the introduction of tier 4 versions of speed-based damage reduction like Close Call 4 or Spurn 4, making them even stronger. Very often I see people misunderstanding how damage reduction works, so let's go over the different forms of damage reduction and why stacking DR is so ridiculously strong. Let's start off with an example of a typical God Sword. The way damage reduction actually works is it stacks in layers. So let's say Fallen Ike is going to take 50 damage. First, the damage is reduced by the first layer of DR in the form of Close Call 4 by 50%. Then the remaining 25 damage runs into the next layer of DR in the form of Speed Smoke 4, further reducing it by 40%, resulting in 15 damage. And then finally that 15 damage runs into the final layer of damage reduction in the form of Vile Astra, further reducing it by 30%, down to 11 damage. So as you can see, this is extremely powerful, taking a possibly lethal attack and transforming it into something minimal. Unlike in the past where Omnitanks were very reliant on healing to survive, nowadays damage can be reduced so drastically that healing isn't always necessary. Now obviously there is still some weaknesses to stacking DR, such as damage reduction halving that we saw in Dual Lift, but now is also available on tier 4 versions of Null Follow-Up. There's also damage reduction piercing, which completely ignores all of this damage reduction stacking via skills like Deadeye, Lethality, and Special Spiral 4. This is where Omnitanks began to evolve to counter all the new types of threats that have been introduced. The first example I want to talk about is Godlike Reflexes. Unlike other percentage-based damage reduction, like you would find in Close Call 4 or Vile Astra, Godlike Reflexes is a defensive special, which means that its damage reduction cannot be pierced. So a meta threat like Duocrom could smash right through most damage reduction, but Godlike Reflexes allowed Omnitanks to have a source of reliable damage reduction that typically cannot be bypassed. Obviously this does require some hoops to jump through, such as pre-charging it and also being able to keep it up at all times, but the point is Omnitanks now had more options. Another type of evolution we saw amongst Omnitanks was the introduction of flat damage reduction, also known as true damage reduction. This type of damage reduction functioned completely different than other sources of DR typically did. First of all, it was non-pierceable, so once again, it worked against all the new meta threats popping up. But secondly, it's not based off a percentage of the damage incoming, but a percentage of the unit's chosen stat. Let's use Brave Dimitri as an example, because he is the most common unit with this effect. So let's say Dimitri was going to take 50 damage, but then it goes through the 2 normal layers of damage reduction like before, reducing it to 30 damage and then down to 18 damage. But now we get to the flat damage reduction level, and instead of it being a percentage of the damage, it's a flat number. So in this case, let's say Brave Dimitri has 60 defense, and 20% of that is 12. So the damage is reduced by 12, and it ends up only being a mere 6 damage. And this is why damage reduction stacking and flat damage reduction work so well together. First, the percentage damage reduction activates, reducing a large amount of incoming damage, then the flat damage reduction has the potential to just reduce the damage to 0. Normal damage reduction can almost never take damage down to 0, as it is near impossible to stack up 100% damage reduction because it is multiplicative and not additive, but flat DR can because it works so differently. And now you have a good idea why Brave Dimitri is so ridiculously broken. Now the final unconventional new addition to damage reduction is a Dragon exclusive in the form of a Scowl Effect. This was introduced on Brave Tiki, and what this essentially does is decelerate specials. These Dragon Omnitanks, instead of relying on damage reduction stacking, instead deactivate the effects that would pierce their damage reduction, such as a Precharged Deadeye or Lethality. And this is a very powerful effect, even more now so that it's inheritable. Okay, let's move on to the second pillar of Omnitanking, healing. Now healing itself hasn't developed any type of real counter to Fatal Smoke since its release. There are a few heroes who have ways to get around it, like Brave Claude or users of Special Fighter 4, but for the most part, Fatal Smoke still does its job. But Fatal Smoke has just completely fallen out of the meta. Almost no one uses it ever, and several new sources of healing have popped up that are just much more efficient. One big development is the ability to outsource healing to other units, such as Saline or Legendary Guinevere. This allows the Omnitank to run a more offensive special or stack damage reduction in that special slot instead, which overall makes them a lot stronger. Some other sources of healing we have received is Mystic Boost 4, which allows Omnitanks to not only get no counter disrupt, but also get a lot more consistent healing through their B slots. And then of course we can't forget the extremely powerful finish skills that allow Omnitanks who can get distant counter from their weapon, or in the case of dragons through their seal slot, a way to get 7 healing per hit and additional true damage to secure kills. So while healing hasn't necessarily found a new way to overcome the original reason it died, it has created many new sources, and overall the demand for healing has decreased with our new ways to stack damage reduction. The final pillar of Omnitanking we have to discuss is Null Follow-Up. NFU is the effect the entire meta revolves around currently. Almost every single unit in the game wants some kind of Null Follow-Up. Be that offensive Null Follow-Up for nukes, defensive Null Follow-Up for save units via Hardy Fighter, or even full Null Follow-Up for Omnitanks. The ability to secure your own doubles while denying the enemies is pivotal in almost every single matchup in the game. Now back when Omnitanks originally reigned over the meta, NFU is not an easy effect to come by. Essentially the only way to get this effect was to run it in your B slot, which realistically no Omnitank could, because they needed to run Close Call, Spurn, etc. Now there were a few Omnitanks who had this effect naturally built into their weapon, such as Base Merida and the Byleths, and because of that they were extremely powerful. But that has completely changed in today's meta. Null Follow-Up is literally everywhere. Almost every nuke has offensive Null Follow-Up built into their weapon, infantry units can get Null Follow-Up from their B slot, Seal slot, and even from outside sources like Infantry Speed Tactic, Infantry Null Follow-Up, or even Legendary Male Byleth. Other unit types can get it from Katie and Lyn, or even Fallen Lilith. The amount of different ways you can get Null Follow-Up is just ridiculous. And this has been a major boon to Omnitanking, because it allows these units to consistently only get hit once if they are doing their job correctly and outspeeding their foes. It also means that these units have more space in their kit or in their weapon for other effects, meaning overall they're just more powerful. And so when it comes down to the reason why Omnitanks return to the meta, the answer is simple. Every single effect an Omnitank needs to succeed has been improved drastically, and the amount of versatility and support Omnitanks now have exceeds anything we've seen in the past. And that's not even discussing the ridiculously overpowered support units we have received in the past year, but that's a topic for its own video. Now with that said, let's talk about the next evolution of Omnitanks. Originally this video was just meant to be a video on Diamant, but as always I love to talk and I just don't know how to shut up, so instead we have a full video on the nature of Omnitanks. Now the reason this video expands so drastically is because Diamant himself is a very unique Omnitank, who I think can reveal the direction intelligent systems will be taking Omnitanks in the future. Let's start off by going over Diamant's preference weapon and what makes him so damn unique. So we have our basic effects, slaying and plus 5 to all stats. But then we get 25% defense-based truth damage and flat damage reduction, an effect we have seen on meta Omnitanks like Brave Dimitri. A quick impulse effect that when Diamant initiates combat allows him to pop off big specials, an anti-guard effect when the foe initiates, meaning Diamant can guarantee his big special to retaliate with, and even some nice healing built into the base weapon. But where Diamant really gets interesting is the final 3 effects. First we have a trade-off of damage reduction piercing for losing the ability to stack damage reduction. Now I'm going to be honest, this is not a good trade by any means, but we'll dive into that topic in a second. Second, we have a defensive Null Follow-Up effect, but it is applied to Diamant himself and the opponent, meaning Diamant or the foe cannot double via effects like Quick Riposte or any other guaranteed follow-up attack. And then finally, the most interesting effect, the condition to make a follow-up attack is changed. Instead of needing 5 more speed than the opponent, you need 25 more speed than the opponent. And once again, this affects Diamant as well. Let's break down the first major effect, the damage reduction trade-off. So Diamant naturally has 25% flat damage reduction, and he's able to get additional damage reduction via skills like defensive specials, such as Escutcheon, Pavis, Sacred Cow, Aegis, and even godlike reflexes. But he is not able to get damage reduction from a multitude of new damage reduction skills like Close Call 4, Guard 4, Null Counter Disrupt 4, Speed Smoke 4, or even Vital Astra. So what does this mean? Well, Diamant is actually very squishy. I think a lot of people hear flat damage reduction and immediately associate it with being broken due to characters like Brave Dimitri, Spring Maria, or Har. But realistically, the reason those units are so damn tanky is because they can stack normal damage reduction with flat damage reduction. As you can see, Diamant can't really do that. So if an incoming attack is going to deal 50 damage, well, he only gets to reduce it by a flat amount. So an example like this, he is still taking 70% of the incoming damage, which is a ton. Now this can be remedied to an extent with something like a defensive special, but those have some weaknesses as well. Specials like Sacred Cow or Aegis only work on ranged attacks, so they aren't universal. And a special like godlike reflexes, which is universal, has 2 problems. One, it needs to be pre-charged, and needs to be recharged between each combat, and it also requires a speed check, and Diamant isn't the fastest Omnitank in the game. You can make it work, but you're gonna need some help. When it comes to a second major effect, a defensive Null Follow-Up that also affects himself, realistically this just makes it very difficult for Diamant to double as it cements his reliance on speed. But his third condition makes it so he needs 25 more speed than his opponent. So in a sense, Diamant wants to one-shot foes, which his kit definitely helps him do, but it comes at a heavy cost. Essentially, Diamant is trying to play a fair game when the rest of the meta is full of cheaters. I don't think this makes Diamant a bad Omnitank by any means, but it does mean he requires heavy investment and support to make him work at full potential. So let's discuss the final major effect Diamant has, and the effect I think reveals the most about the future of Omnitanks. The effect that changes the condition to double from 5 speed to 25 speed. As I discussed earlier, the entire meta revolves around Null Follow-Up, and the meta has been this way for quite a while. And I think this effect shows the way Intelligent Systems plans to change that, or in other words, a way to nerf Null Follow-Up. The first thing to understand is that Null Follow-Up does not affect the skill in any way, because this effect isn't denying a follow-up, it's just changing the rules of how to perform a follow-up attack. And I think this is a genius way to allow Omnitanks to be able to deny follow-up attacks, but also get around NFU. Now the problem is that it was poorly implemented here on Diamant. First of all, the condition was just changed to have way more speed. But if we look at the nukes nowadays, they are reaching anywhere from 85 to 90 speed, which is absurd. So that means realistically, to be in that 25 speed range, Diamant himself needs to be fast, and he also needs to invest into skills that increase his speed. After all, units nowadays can get anywhere from 15 to 25 speed just from their skills, and that's not even considering the ridiculous amount of speed some units can get from their weapons as well, such as Duo Shamir. But I do think the concept behind this effect is very powerful. Imagine if the effect was changed and said, in order to double, you must have 5 more defense than the opponent. Well, an effect like that couldn't be stopped by a skill like Null Follow-Up, and it also would allow the Omnitank to invest completely into defensive stats and dump their speed completely. And I think it's possible this is the route Intelligent Systems may be taking in the future, to once again evolve Omnitanks to the next level and nerf the meta's complete dependence on Null Follow-Up. If you watched this entire video, thank you so much for watching. I'd love to hear what you think about the current Omnitank meta, the way Intelligent Systems is pushing power through new inheritable skills, and what you think of my ideas about the future of Omnitanks in the comment section down below. As always, I'd love to thank my members for all their constant support, and if you enjoyed the video, like and subscribe. This has been Oblivion. Catch you later.